Growing up in the shadow of the Hamilton estate meant understanding two fundamental truths. Money was power, and Uncle Victor wielded both with ruthless precision. My grandfather, Edward Hamilton, had built Hamilton Industries from a small manufacturing operation into a regional powerhouse over 50 years of relentless work. What began with automotive parts had expanded into real estate, technology investments, and a small but profitable pharmaceutical division. I'm Matthew Hamilton, the middle child of my grandfather's youngest daughter, Catherine. Unlike my cousins who jockeyed for positions within the family business, I'd chosen a different path, teaching history at a public high school 30 miles from the sprawling Hamilton compound where my grandfather had lived his final years. This decision had firmly established me as the family disappointment, a status that bothered me less than it perhaps should have. "You're throwing away your potential," Uncle Victor had told me during one particularly tense Thanksgiving dinner. "Teaching? Any college graduate can teach. Hamiltons are meant to build, to lead. Not everyone measures success the same way, Victor," my grandfather had interjected, his voice still commanding despite his 86 years. The unexpected defense had silenced my uncle temporarily, though the disapproving glances continued throughout the evening. That was my grandfather, unpredictable, shrewd, and impossible to categorize neatly. He could be cutting in business negotiations, yet surprisingly gentle with his great-grandchildren. He demanded excellence, but defined it more broadly than most of the family recognized. He and I had developed an unexpected bond during my college years when I'd help organize his extensive library of historical texts and first editions. Our conversations about history, philosophy, and human nature became the foundation of my teaching career, though I rarely shared this with the family. Some connections were too precious to expose to ridicule. When grandfather died peacefully in his sleep 3 months after his 87th birthday, the family's grief was genuine, but so was the undercurrent of anticipation regarding his estate. The will reading was scheduled for exactly 2 weeks after the funeral. Time enough for distant relatives to arrange travel, but not so long that business matters remained in limbo. "It's going to be a bloodbath," my younger sister Ellie predicted as we drove together to the offices of Bergman, Walsh and Associates, the law firm that had handled the Hamilton affairs for 3 generations. "Victor's been positioning himself for years." She wasn't wrong. Uncle Victor, my grandfather's only son, had spent decades cultivating his image as the natural heir to the Hamilton legacy. As the current CEO of Hamilton Industries, he'd made it clear he expected to assume full control upon his father's death. What none of us anticipated was the bombshell my grandfather had prepared, or how a simple video would shatter the carefully constructed hierarchy that had defined the Hamilton family for decades. The Hamilton dynasty operated like a small kingdom, complete with alliances, rivalries, and a strict pecking order. At the top had been grandfather Edward, the patriarch whose word was effectively law. Despite officially retiring 15 years earlier, he had maintained tight control through a complex web of voting shares, board positions held by loyal friends, and the simple force of his formidable personality. Below him stood Uncle Victor, the crown prince who had spent his entire 58 years preparing to ascend the throne. Tall, immaculately dressed, and possessed of the Hamilton blue eyes that could charm or intimidate as needed. Victor had expanded the technology division significantly while maintaining the company's traditional manufacturing base. His business acumen was undeniable, matched only by his political skill in neutralizing potential rivals within the family. My mother, Catherine, 10 years younger than Victor, had chosen a medical career rather than joining the family business directly. This decision had created a permanent tension with her brother, who viewed it as shirking responsibility. Still, her position as a renowned neurosurgeon had added a different kind of prestige to the Hamilton name, and grandfather had always spoken of her accomplishments with evident pride. The third sibling, Aunt Rebecca, had died in a boating accident 20 years earlier, leaving behind twin daughters, Sophia and Olivia, who were now in their early 30s. Both had roles in Hamilton Industries, Sophia in legal affairs and Olivia in marketing, though neither had achieved the level of influence their mother might have wielded had she lived. The cousins formed our own complex social ecosystem. Derek, Victor's eldest son, served as CFO under his father and mirrored Victor's ambition and Polish, if not his strategic brilliance. His younger sister Victoria managed the Hamilton Foundation, the family's philanthropic arm. with genuine passion for its work, but constant frustration at its secondary status within the family power structure. Then there was me, along with my sisters, Ellie, who worked as an environmental engineer for companies decidedly not affiliated with Hamilton Industries, and Grace, the oldest, who had married a diplomat and lived abroad, returning only for major family events. The estate itself reflected the Hamilton legacy, a sprawling 20-acre property featuring the main house where grandfather had lived, 3 smaller residences occupied by various family members, and extensive grounds including a private lake. The compound, as we sometimes called it, existed in its own bubble of privilege, security systems, and staff who had served the family for generations. Hamilton Industries headquarters occupied a gleaming tower in the city's financial district. Its logo, a stylized H with a horizontal line representing a horizon, recognized throughout the region as a symbol of old money and considerable influence. The company employed over 5,000 people across its divisions, making it one of the largest employers in the state. My grandfather had navigated this complex empire with remarkable skill, balancing family dynamics against business necessities, tradition against innovation. He was not a warm man by nature, but he possessed a wisdom about human motivation that had served him well in both boardroom and family gatherings. "People are predictable when you understand what truly drives them," he once told me during one of our discussions in his library. "The mistake most make is assuming everyone is driven by the same things. Money, power, recognition. These motivate some, but others seek security, connection, meaning. Know which you're dealing with, and you'll rarely be surprised." I often wondered which category he placed each family member in, especially Uncle Victor, whose single-minded pursuit of control had intensified as grandfather aged. Their relationship had always been complicated, mutual respect mixed with fundamental differences in values and vision that neither fully acknowledged publicly. As we filed into the conference room at Bergman, Walsh & Associates, these family dynamics were on full display. Victor and Derek arrived together in matching charcoal suits, speaking quietly but confidently. My mother entered alone, elegant and reserved as always. The rest of us arranged ourselves around the massive oak table, the atmosphere thick with unspoken expectations and long-established rivalries about to come to a head. James Bergman, the silver-haired senior partner who had been my grandfather's attorney and confidant for over 40 years, called the meeting to order with a gentle clearing of his throat. At 75, he maintained the composure and precision that had made him legendary in legal circles. His wire-rimmed glasses perched perfectly on his aristocratic nose. "Thank you all for coming," he began, placing a leather portfolio on the table before him. "Before we proceed with the formal reading of Edward's will," he left specific instructions about how this meeting should be conducted. Uncle Victor shifted forward slightly in his chair, his fingers tapping once against the polished table, a subtle tell of impatience I'd observed in countless family meetings. "We're all busy people, James. Perhaps we could move efficiently through the preliminaries." Bergman's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight stiffening of his posture. "Edward's instructions are not what I would classify as preliminaries, Victor. They are in fact integral to the distribution of his estate." This unexpected pushback caused a ripple of tension around the table. Bergman had always treated Victor with deference, recognizing his position as the heir apparent. This subtle shift in dynamic didn't go unnoticed by anyone in the room. "Of course," Victor conceded smoothly. "Please proceed as my father wished." Bergman nodded and continued. "Edward recorded a video message 1 month before his passing. He was explicit that this message be viewed in its entirety before any documents are presented or discussed." This announcement generated surprised murmurs. Grandfather had been notoriously private, avoiding photographs when possible, and certainly never embracing video technology. The idea of him recording a message to be played after his death seemed entirely out of character. "Is the video necessary?" my mother asked quietly. "Dad was never comfortable on camera." "He was most insistent," Bergman replied, his tone gentle but firm. "He said matters would become clear once you viewed it." As his assistant set up the projection equipment, I observed the varying reactions around the table. Derek was whispering urgently to his father, while Sophia and Olivia exchanged concerned glances. Victoria looked merely curious. While my sisters displayed varying degrees of emotional preparation, Ellie with her usual defensive posture, Grace with the diplomatic neutrality she'd perfected in her married life. The lights dimmed, and my grandfather's face appeared on the screen mounted on the conference room wall. The sight of him so recently lost yet so vividly present created an immediate hush. He was seated in his library, surrounded by the books we had organized together, looking directly into the camera with the piercing focus that had intimidated business competitors for decades. "If you're watching this," he began without preamble, "then I've finally run out of time. Age catches up with even the most stubborn among us." A ghost of a smile crossed his face before disappearing. "I've never been one for sentiment or lengthy goodbyes, so I'll keep this direct. The distribution of my estate may come as a surprise to some of you. Before James explains the details, I want to provide context for decisions that might otherwise be misinterpreted or contested." His gaze seemed to sharpen, and I had the unsettling feeling he was looking directly at Uncle Victor. Family legacy is about more than bloodlines or job titles. It's about values, vision, and the courage to protect both, even when doing so is difficult or unpopular. The camera pulled back slightly, revealing that he held a folder in his hands. "Over the past 5 years, I've been conducting a thorough review of Hamilton Industries' operations, governance, and future prospects. What I've discovered has informed my final decisions regarding both my personal assets and the company's leadership structure moving forward." Uncle Victor's face remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrests of his chair. Whatever my grandfather was about to reveal, Victor clearly had some inkling of its nature, and was not pleased. "To be explicitly clear," grandfather continued, "this is not about punishment or favoritism. It's about preserving what I've built in a manner consistent with its founding principles. Some of you will be disappointed, others surprised. But know that these decisions were made with great deliberation and complete conviction." He opened the folder and looked down at its contents. "I'll begin with Hamilton Industries. Contrary to what has perhaps been assumed, the controlling interest in the company is not being transferred to a single individual. Instead, the video suddenly paused as Bergman pressed a button on the remote. The attorney's expression was apologetic but firm. Edward asked that I interrupt at this point to make an important observation. He wanted me to note the reactions in the room before proceeding further. All eyes turned to Uncle Victor, whose composure had noticeably slipped. A flush had crept up his neck, and the vein at his temple pulsed visibly. Derek looked equally unsettled, while most other family members appeared simply confused by this unusual procedure. "Shall we continue?" Bergman asked, his tone making it clear this was not really a question. As he pressed play and my grandfather resumed speaking, I had the distinct feeling we were witnessing the opening moves of a game my grandfather had been setting up for years, one with rules only he fully understood, and consequences that would reshape the Hamilton family forever. As grandfather's video continued, I became aware of subtle undercurrents flowing beneath the main narrative. His explanation of the restructured company ownership divided among family members with a professional management team installed was just the framework for a more complex revelation. "The pharmaceutical division," he continued, his voice taking on a more somber quality, "has been separated entirely from Hamilton Industries and placed in a specialized trust with strict ethical oversight provisions. This seemingly administrative detail caused a visible reaction from both Derek and Sophia. They exchanged a quick glance that contained volumes of unspoken communication, confirming my suspicion that something significant lurked beneath this particular decision. The pharmaceutical division had been Hamilton Industries' fastest-growing segment over the past decade, developing treatments for rare neurological conditions. Its profit margins were exceptional, and Uncle Victor had frequently highlighted its performance during family business updates. What wasn't clear was why grandfather would specifically isolate it from the rest of the company structure. "Some of you," grandfather continued, as if anticipating the unasked questions, may be wondering about this decision. 3 years ago, I received concerning information about research practices and clinical trial data within the division. My private investigation revealed patterns that troubled me, deeply patterns that prioritize profit over patient safety and scientific integrity." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. My mother, the neurosurgeon, straightened in her chair, her professional interest clearly piqued by this revelation. Rather than take immediate public action, which would have devastated families depending on our medications, I implemented a covert restructuring and oversight program. Those responsible for the most egregious violations were quietly removed. What troubles me is that these issues developed under supposedly vigilant leadership. His gaze seemed to bore through the screen directly at Victor, whose face had become a rigid mask. The trust now controlling the pharmaceutical division will ensure transparent practices, ethical research standards, and reasonable pricing models. Any family member wishing to remain involved with this division must agree to these non-negotiable conditions. This wasn't just about inheritance or company control. It was about ethical breaches. That had been concealed from most of the family. I glanced at my sisters, wondering if they had known anything about this. Ellie's environmental engineering background made her particularly sensitive to corporate responsibility issues. But her shocked expression suggested this was news to her as well. The video continued, but I found myself watching the room rather than the screen. Derek was furiously typing something on his phone beneath the table. Sophia had gone completely still, her legal mind likely calculating potential liabilities. Victoria, who oversaw the Foundation's public image, looked physically ill at the implications for the family reputation. A separate drama was unfolding between my mother and Uncle Victor through nothing more than loaded glances. As a doctor, she would be particularly disturbed by the ethical violations grandfather had described. The silent accusation in her eyes met Victor's cold defensiveness across the table. Meanwhile, Olivia, whose marketing role had undoubtedly included promoting the pharmaceutical division's public image, appeared genuinely blindsided. Whatever had happened, she clearly hadn't been privy to the concerning practices. Grandfather's next words pulled my attention back to the screen. I've provided James with a secure drive containing all evidence from my investigation. This is not for public disclosure unless absolutely necessary, but it exists as protection against any attempt to reverse the trust provisions. The implication was clear. He had created a deadman's switch to prevent anyone, particularly Victor, from circumventing his wishes. Regarding the pharmaceutical division, whatever had happened there was serious enough that my meticulous, private grandfather had documented it as leverage from beyond the grave. As these hidden conflicts rippled through the room, I realized grandfather's video was strategically unraveling the careful facade the Hamilton family had maintained for years. The inheritance wasn't simply about money and control, it was about forcing accountability and exposing long-buried secrets that some family members had never intended to come to light. Now to matters of personal inheritance, grandfather continued after a brief pause, shifting positions slightly in his library chair. While the company restructuring affects all of you to varying degrees, there remains my personal estate, the properties, investment portfolios, art collection, and liquid assets not directly tied to Hamilton Industries. This was what most of the family had been waiting for. While the company was the core of the Hamilton fortune, grandfather's personal wealth was substantial in its own right, estimated at well over $100 million. The main estate alone was worth nearly $20 million. Traditionally, such assets would pass primarily to my only son, he acknowledged, nodding slightly as if Victor were sitting across from him rather than watching a recording. And indeed, Victor has made his expectations clear on numerous occasions. Uncle Victor's expression relaxed marginally, the familiar confidence returning to his posture. Whatever surprises had come regarding the company's structure, he clearly believed the personal inheritance would follow conventional patterns. However, grandfather continued, inheritance based solely on birth order or gender reflects values from a different era. Values I have come to question in my later years. The shift in Victor's expression was subtle but unmistakable, confidence giving way to uncertainty, then hardening into something closer to anger. My personal assets will be divided as follows, grandfather said, lifting a document from his desk. 30% will establish an education foundation for employees of Hamilton Industries and their families. 20% will be divided equally among my grandchildren, with provisions that it be used for pursuits outside the family business. A chance to explore paths not previously open to you due to family expectations. This unexpected provision caused a ripple of reactions around the table, surprise from most, calculation from others as they quickly did the math on what their share might be. The remaining 50%, grandfather continued, his voice taking on a more deliberate tone, will go to the family member who has demonstrated the clearest understanding of what I value most: integrity, perspective, and the courage to choose purpose over expectation. He set down the document and looked directly into the camera. That person is Matthew. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. All eyes turned to me, expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to outright hostility. I felt my chest constrict as the implications sank in. Half of my grandfather's personal fortune directed to the family member who had deliberately stepped away from the Hamilton legacy of wealth and power. This decision may seem arbitrary or even punitive to some of you, grandfather acknowledged, but it is neither. Over the past decade, I've had conversations with each of you about your visions, values, and understanding of what the Hamilton name should represent. Some of those conversations were direct. Others occurred through your actions and choices. Matthew was the only one who consistently prioritized impact over status, growth over accumulation. Uncle Victor's composure finally shattered completely. "This is absurd," he exclaimed, half rising from his chair. "The teacher? The one who rejected everything you built? This has to be a mistake." Bergman paused the video again, his expression grave. "There is no mistake, Victor." Edward was of sound mind and completely clear about his wishes. "He was manipulated," Victor insisted, glaring at me. "Matthew must have gotten to him during those hours in the library, filling his head with idealistic nonsense when he was vulnerable." My mother's voice cut through the tension. "That's enough, Victor. Dad was never vulnerable or easily influenced, and you know it." Victor turned to her, his face flushed with anger. "You're defending this? Your son getting the lion's share while the rest of us who actually contributed to the family legacy get comparative scraps?" Before she could respond, Bergman spoke again. "There's more to the video that addresses these very concerns." Edward anticipated this reaction. He pressed play once more. Grandfather's expression on screen had hardened slightly. "For those questioning this decision or suggesting manipulation, I've prepared something additional." He reached for a remote control on his desk. "What you're about to see is footage from a meeting in my office approximately 3 years ago. I had security cameras installed after certain documents went missing from my desk, a precaution that proved more revealing than I initially imagined." The image on screen changed to a different angle of the library. Date stamped 3 years earlier. Uncle Victor appeared, closing the door behind him and approaching grandfather's desk with confident strides. "I've finalized the pharmaceutical expansion plan," recorded Victor announced, placing a folder before my grandfather. "The projections are even better than we discussed. And the safety concerns with the new compound?" grandfather asked, his voice notably cooler than his son's enthusiastic tone. Victor waved a dismissive hand. "Manageable. We can adjust the reporting parameters to keep the FDA satisfied while maintaining our timeline." "Adjust the reporting parameters," grandfather repeated slowly. "You mean alter the clinical data?" Victor's recorded self leaned forward, lowering his voice despite being alone with his father. "I mean focus on the positive outcomes while contextualizing the anomalies. Every pharmaceutical company does it. The benefits far outweigh the minimal risks. People could be harmed, Victor. Or they could be helped," Victor insisted. "This treatment could help thousands, but not if we let excessive caution delay it by years. Sometimes leadership means making difficult decisions for the greater good." "The greater good?" grandfather echoed. "Or the greater profit?" The recorded Victor straightened, his expression hardening. "They're not mutually exclusive. The company thrives, patients get treatment, shareholders see returns. Everyone wins. Except those who experience the anomalies you're so eager to contextualize. This is business, not a philosophy seminar," Victor snapped, his carefully maintained respect slipping. "If you're not comfortable with how modern pharmaceutical development works, perhaps it's time to fully retire and let those of us with current industry knowledge take the reins." The footage ended, returning to grandfather in his chair. This was one of many similar conversations that informed my decisions about both the company restructuring and my personal estate. I don't share it to humiliate or expose, but to provide clarity about the values that ultimately must guide the Hamilton legacy moving forward. As the implications of what we'd just witnessed sank in, Uncle Victor stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is a selective presentation designed to manipulate perceptions," he declared, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "I've always acted in the best interests of the company and the family. Then you won't." Mine the Ethical Oversight Committee reviewing all pharmaceutical division decisions going forward, Bergman replied calmly. As Edward has required in the terms of the trust. For the first time in my life, I saw Uncle Victor completely at a loss. The carefully constructed image he'd maintained, the confident air, the visionary leader, the rightful successor, had been methodically dismantled by the very man whose approval he had sought his entire life. And somehow, inexplicably, I, the family member who had chosen to step away from it, all was now at the center of my grandfather's vision for the future of the Hamilton legacy. The immediate aftermath of the video revelation unfolded like a series of shockwaves, each reaction triggering another in a cascade of family drama. Uncle Victor stormed out of the conference room, Derek trailing behind him after shooting a venomous glare in my direction. The twin energy of father and son, always so controlled and strategic, had dissolved into raw, unfiltered fury. "This isn't over," Derek muttered as he passed my chair. "The courts won't let this stand." Bergman, overhearing this, simply raised an eyebrow. "I would strongly advise against litigation. Derek, your grandfather's documentation is extensive, and further evidence would become public record if challenged." My mother remained seated, her expression a complex mixture of vindication and concern. As a doctor, the ethical violations in the pharmaceutical division clearly disturbed her professionally. As a sister, the public exposure of her brother's actions represented a family fracture that might never fully heal. "Did you know?" I asked her quietly as others began to process their own reactions around us. She shook her head. I suspected something wasn't right with the trial data when a colleague mentioned unusual result patterns. I asked questions, but Victor assured me everything was above board. Her mouth tightened. I should have pushed harder. Across the table, my cousins were having their own reckonings. Sophia, whose legal career was closely tied to the company, looked physically ill as she presumably calculated the professional implications of being associated with data manipulation, even peripherally. Olivia had moved to a corner of the room, already on her phone, likely addressing the immediate PR concerns this would raise if word leaked beyond the family. Victoria approached me directly, her usual Polish temporarily abandoned. "Did you know about any of this? About the inheritance or the pharmaceutical issues?" "None of it," I assured her. "I'm as shocked as everyone else. But why you?" The question wasn't accusatory, just genuinely bewildered. "You walked away from everything, Hamilton." "Maybe that's exactly why," Ellie interjected, joining us. "Matt was the only one who valued something beyond the Hamilton empire. The only one whose worth wasn't tied to the family fortune." Victoria considered this, then nodded slowly. "Uncle Edward always did appreciate independence, even when he acted like a control freak." She offered me a tentative smile. "Well, congratulations, I guess. Try not to become unbearable with all that money." As the initial shock began to settle, Bergman called for attention once more. "There are still details to address regarding the specific terms of Matthew's inheritance and the company restructuring. But perhaps a short recess would be beneficial for everyone to collect themselves." The suggestion was met with grateful nods. As family members dispersed to make calls or simply process in private, Bergman gestured for me to join him in a smaller adjacent office. "Your grandfather anticipated this would be overwhelming for you," he said once we were seated. "He left you this to read privately before we continue." He handed me an envelope with my name written in grandfather's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a single page, the message brief but profound. Asterisk Matthew. Asterisk asterisk. By now you understand that wealth is both opportunity and burden. I've observed how teaching has revealed your true character, patience, empathy, and a fundamental understanding that influence isn't measured in dollars, but in lives touched. These are the qualities I hope will guide your stewardship of the Hamilton resources. Asterisk, asterisk, this inheritance isn't a reward for rejecting the family business, but recognition that you grasped what truly matters, something I learned too late in my own journey. The money changes nothing about who you are. It merely amplifies your capacity to enact your values on a larger scale. Asterisk, asterisk, choose wisely, trust few completely, and remember that legacy is defined by impact, not accumulation. Asterisk, asterisk, grandfather, asterisk. As I refolded the letter, I realized that the true inheritance wasn't the money at all, but the responsibility it represented, a responsibility I had never sought or prepared for, yet one that now fell squarely on my shoulders. Outside the office, I could hear raised voices as the family continued to process the seismic shift in the Hamilton power structure. Whatever came next would fundamentally alter not just my life, but the dynamics that had defined the Hamiltons for generations. The weeks following the will reading unfolded in a blur of legal meetings, family confrontations, and personal reckonings. Uncle Victor, as predicted, moved to challenge the will, filing objections that questioned grandfather's mental capacity and my supposed undue influence. Bergman handled these challenges with the calm efficiency of someone who had anticipated every move, producing medical evaluations, witness statements, and additional recordings that firmly established grandfather's clarity of mind and purpose. After 3 weeks of costly legal maneuvering that only threatened to make the pharmaceutical division's ethical issues more public, Victor reluctantly withdrew his objections. The capitulation wasn't graceful. It came with a terse email to the family announcing he would be stepping back from Hamilton Industries to pursue independent ventures. Derek, following his father's lead but adding his own brand of bitterness, resigned from his CFO position with a company-wide email implying the new structure would lead to Hamilton's decline. The professional exodus of the father-son team created immediate practical challenges for the company, but also cleared the path for the restructuring grandfather had envisioned. My own adjustment proved equally challenging, though in different ways. The sheer magnitude of what I'd inherited, not just money, but responsibility for a legacy, was initially paralyzing. I continued teaching through the end of the school year, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of classes and student interactions while my world outside school hours transformed completely. "You don't have to keep teaching now," my mother observed over coffee one Sunday morning. "No one would blame you for taking time to manage your new responsibilities." "Teaching isn't something I do because I have to," I replied. "It's part of who I am." Giving it up would mean losing the perspective that grandfather valued in the first place. She studied me thoughtfully. "You sound like him sometimes. He always said context was everything, that wealth without purpose was just numbers on paper." This conversation sparked an idea that eventually became the framework for how I would approach my inheritance. I would continue teaching, maintaining that grounding influence in my life, while creating a structure to manage the Hamilton resources in alignment with both my values and my grandfather's vision. With Bergman's guidance, I established the Hamilton Education Initiative, directing a significant portion of the inheritance toward addressing educational inequality in our region. The focus wasn't simply on scholarships, but on comprehensive support systems, teacher development, community resource centers, family support services, and curriculum innovation. This approach didn't immediately heal the family fractures. Victor and Derek maintained their distance, reportedly exploring business opportunities overseas. Sophia eventually resigned from the company's legal team, choosing to join a healthcare ethics organization instead of a move that suggested her own process of reconciling with what had happened in the pharmaceutical division. The most surprising development came from Olivia, who approached me 6 months after the will reading with an unexpected proposal. "I've been thinking about the marketing division's potential beyond product promotion," she explained, uncharacteristically hesitant. "There's an opportunity to rebuild Hamilton's public identity around transparency and social impact. The narrative shift could be powerful not just for our image, but for how we actually operate." Her genuine enthusiasm revealed a dimension to my cousin. I'd never fully appreciated someone with creative vision who had perhaps been constrained by the previous leadership structure. Over the following weeks, we developed a collaborative approach that utilized her communication expertise alongside my educational focus. Victoria, already aligned with social impact through her foundation work, became another natural ally. "Uncle Edward would be pleased," she told me after our first quarterly review of the new initiatives. "Not just with the programs, but with how you've maintained your teaching role. It keeps you connected to what matters." The most meaningful conversation came nearly a year after grandfather's passing, when my mother joined me for dinner at my modest home, the same home I'd lived in before the inheritance, my one act of stubborn continuity. "I visited the new community learning center today," she said as we prepared dinner together. "The one in Riverside that your initiative funded. I saw the plaque dedicating it to Dad." I nodded, dicing vegetables for the salad. It seemed fitting. His vision made it possible. "I think he would be prouder of that center than any building with the Hamilton Industries logo," she said quietly. "He built the business because it was what he knew how to do." But toward the end, He became increasingly concerned with what it all meant, what lasting impact it would have beyond profit margins and market share did. "You know about his investigation into the pharmaceutical division?" I asked, a question I'd hesitated to raise directly until now. She set down her wine glass carefully. "Not the extent of it. He consulted me on some medical questions, hypothetical scenarios about treatment protocols and data interpretation. I suspected he was concerned about something specific, but he was careful not to implicate Victor directly in our conversations." She looked away briefly. "Perhaps he was protecting me from having to choose sides. And now? Where do you stand with Victor?" "We're civil when necessary. Beyond that," she shrugged slightly. "Some bridges can't be rebuilt the same way once they've burned. But I'm at peace with where I stand." As we continued preparing dinner, I reflected on the unexpected journey of the past year. The inheritance that Uncle Victor had so confidently claimed would be all his had instead become a catalyst for transformation. Not just of the Hamilton resources and businesses, but of family relationships, individual priorities, and ultimately, the legacy that would define us moving forward. Grandfather's final video hadn't just redistributed wealth. It had forced a reckoning with values that money couldn't buy and truths that power couldn't suppress. In that way, it may have been his most valuable bequest of all. 18 months after the will reading, Hamilton Industries prepared for its annual shareholder meeting, the first to be held under the fully implemented new structure. The company had weathered the transition better than many analysts predicted, with a diversified leadership model proving more innovative and adaptable than the previous top-down approach. The pharmaceutical division, now under ethical oversight, had actually increased its long-term valuation by focusing on sustainable research practices and transparent clinical trials. For me, the meeting represented a significant milestone, though I maintained my teaching position. I had accepted a role on the company's newly formed Social Impact Board, which evaluated major business decisions through the lens of community effect and ethical considerations. This wasn't a token position. The board held real veto power over initiatives that failed to meet established standards for responsible corporate citizenship. The evening before the meeting, I received an unexpected call from Bergman. "Matthew, there's a development you should be aware of before tomorrow," he said, his typically measured tone carrying an unusual edge of concern. "Victor and Derek have acquired a significant number of shares through a network of investment vehicles. They're not at controlling interest, but it's substantial enough to potentially disrupt proceedings." "I thought they were in Singapore launching a new venture," I replied, surprise giving way to wariness. That was the public narrative. In reality, it seems they've been methodically building support among certain board members and investors who were loyal to the old regime. "What exactly are they planning?" "My sources indicate they intend to propose a resolution questioning the current leadership structure, arguing that the diversified model has diluted the company's focus and competitive edge. They'll present alternative financial projections suggesting Hamilton Industries could be significantly more profitable under centralized control. Specifically, I absorbed this information, recognizing it as a calculated move to undermine the changes Grandfather had implemented. Can they succeed? It's unlikely they have the votes to pass such a resolution. But that may not be their primary objective, Bergman explained. Creating doubt, dividing the leadership, suggesting instability to the market. These could be stepping stones to a longer-term strategy. Have you informed the other board members? Only those who need to know for preparation purposes. Too broad a communication risks creating exactly the sense of crisis Victor likely hopes to generate. After ending the call, I sat in my study, surrounded by books much as Grandfather had been in his final video. The symmetry wasn't lost on me, other Hamilton facing a challenge to the vision they valued. Another moment requiring difficult choices about how to protect what mattered. What Victor failed to understand about Grandfather about me was that neither of us was motivated primarily by control or personal gain. Grandfather's vision for Hamilton Industries transcended quarterly profits. It encompassed the company's role in the community, its ethical responsibilities, and its potential as a force for positive change. The inheritance had never been about the money. It had been about preserving that vision against those who would reduce it to nothing more than a vehicle for wealth accumulation. I spent the night reviewing company performance data, ethical initiative outcomes, and community impact reports. By morning, I had developed a clear strategy for the shareholder meeting, not just to counter Victor's move, but to reaffirm the principles that now guided Hamilton Industries. As I dressed for the meeting in a suit that still felt somewhat foreign despite the occasions I'd worn it over the past year and a half, I realized this confrontation had perhaps been inevitable. Victor had lost the battle over grandfather's will, but his belief in his rightful place at the head of Hamilton Industries remained unshaken. Today would determine whether grandfather's final video had truly changed the company's trajectory, or merely delayed Victor's vision for its future. The Hamilton Industries shareholder meeting was held in the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel, a space designed to impress with soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and impeccable acoustics. By the time I arrived, the room was already filled with board members, major investors, and media representatives anticipating the company's first comprehensive performance review under its new structure. I spotted Uncle Victor and Derek immediately holding court near the entrance, shaking hands and speaking animatedly with several older board members who had served since my grandfather's early days. Victor had aged noticeably in the 18 months since our confrontation. Silver now dominated his temples, and lines had deepened around his mouth, but his commanding presence remained intact. Seeing him in his element, I understood why so many had assumed he was the natural heir to the Hamilton legacy. "Quite the prodigal return," murmured Victoria, appearing at my side in a perfectly tailored suit. "They've been working the room for 30 minutes. Very strategic about who they're approaching. Bergman warned me they might try something today." She nodded. "Olivia's been monitoring the situation through her media contacts. Apparently, they've prepared a comprehensive presentation on unlocking Hamilton's untapped potential, complete with projections showing how much more profitable we'd be under their leadership model." "Classic Victor," I replied. "Lead with numbers big enough to distract from the methods required to achieve them." As the meeting was called to order and preliminary business addressed, I observed Victor and Derek carefully. They sat with the composed patience of predators, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, occasionally exchanging glances or making notes, but otherwise appearing merely attentive. The CFO's presentation on the company's financial performance showed solid, if unspectacular growth, better than market average, but not the explosive numbers that had occasionally marked Victor's tenure. When the new pharmaceutical division head followed with her update, however, the true success of the restructuring became clear. The ethical oversight had initially slowed development timelines, but had ultimately resulted in two breakthrough treatments with exceptional safety profiles and genuine therapeutic value. Long-term projections showed sustainable growth built on scientific integrity rather than corner-cutting. It was during the open discussion period that Victor finally made his move, rising with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "While I appreciate the thorough presentations," he began, his voice carrying perfectly without a microphone, "I believe we should address the elephant in the room. Hamilton Industries has underperformed its potential for 18 months under a fragmented leadership model that prioritizes process over results." A murmur rippled through the audience as he continued. "My son and I have prepared an alternative vision, one that honors the Hamilton legacy of bold innovation while delivering the market-leading returns our shareholders deserve." He gestured, and Derek distributed sleek folders to key board members. "These projections aren't theoretical. They're based on proven strategies we implemented during my tenure as CEO." He turned slightly, finding me in the audience with laser precision. "While my nephew's social experiments may satisfy certain idealistic notions, the hard numbers tell a different story. Hamilton Industries exists to generate value. Everything else is secondary." The room tensed as all eyes turned to me, waiting for my response to this direct challenge. I rose slowly, buttoning my jacket as grandfather might have done, and approached the podium with measured steps. "Thank you, Uncle Victor, for your presentation," I began, my teacher's voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "Your focus on shareholder value is well noted. However, I believe your definition of value may be unnecessarily narrow." I nodded to the technical team, who displayed a new slide on the large screens around the room. "This graph shows Hamilton Industries' traditional financial metrics: revenue, profit margins, market share. By these measures alone, my uncle's approach might indeed generate higher short-term returns." Victor's expression shifted toward satisfaction before I continued. "But these next metrics tell a more complete story. The screen changed to show new data sets. Employee retention has increased 38% under our current model. Community investment has created educational and economic opportunities, generating an estimated $42 million in regional economic impact. And our ethical research protocols have not only prevented potential patient harm, but have established Hamilton as an industry leader in transparent pharmaceutical development. I stepped away from the podium, moving to the center of the stage. The question before us isn't whether Hamilton Industries can generate profit. Of course it can. The question is what kind of profit we wish to generate, and at what cost. From my jacket pocket, I removed a small device, a USB drive that Bergman had provided that morning. Before you vote on my uncle's proposal, there's something my grandfather wanted you to see in the event of such a challenge. The technical team hesitated, looking toward the board chairman, who nodded permission. As they connected the drive, I continued speaking. Edward Hamilton believed that legacy isn't measured quarterly. It's measured in generations, in lives improved, in communities strengthened, in principles upheld even when doing so isn't the most profitable option. The screen flickered, and grandfather appeared once more, seated in his library, just as he had been in the will-reading video. The timestamp showed this recording had been made just 1 week before his death. "If this message is being played," he began, his voice strong despite his visible frailty, "then the vision I established for Hamilton Industries is being challenged on the basis of financial performance. This is neither surprising nor disappointing. It reflects a fundamental difference in values that has existed within our leadership for many years." He leaned forward slightly. "To those prioritizing maximum profit above all else, I offer this reminder. Hamilton Industries wasn't built to enrich a few at the expense of many. It was built to create sustainable value through products and services that genuinely improve lives." The camera pulled back to reveal that he was surrounded by photographs not of buildings or achievements, but of employees, community members, and families impacted by the company's work over decades. I chose Matthew as my successor, not despite his step away from business, but because of it. His perspective as an educator, someone who measures success by growth and understanding rather than accumulation, represents exactly the balance Hamilton needs to thrive not just economically, but ethically. His gaze seemed to find Victor across time and space. Leadership isn't ownership, it's stewardship of something larger than ourselves. I founded this company. I guided its growth. And in my final act as its leader, I am entrusting its future to those who understand that profit without purpose is ultimately unsustainable. As the video ended, a profound silence filled the ballroom. Victor remained standing, but his commanding presence had diminished perceptibly, the confidence in his posture giving way to something more uncertain. When the chairman called for a vote on Victor's proposal, the outcome was decisive. The diversified leadership model would remain with its ethical guardrails and community commitments intact. The Hamilton legacy would continue as grandfather had envisioned, not as a monument to wealth accumulation, but as a testament to the principle that business could serve humanity rather than merely exploit it. As board members and shareholders dispersed, Victor approached me directly for the first time since the will reading. "You won this round," he acknowledged, his tone more resigned than bitter. "But business environments change. Markets shift. Sooner or later, idealism always gives way to pragmatism." I met his gaze steadily. Perhaps what you call idealism is simply a longer view of what creates genuine value. Either way, grandfather made his choice. He did, Victor agreed, something almost like respect flickering briefly in his eyes. The question is whether you're truly prepared for what that choice demands. Leadership isn't a classroom, Matthew. The real world doesn't grade on good intentions. As he turned and walked away, Derek following in his wake, I recognized the truth in his warning. The path grandfather had set me on would never be easy or straightforward. Balancing purpose with profit, ethics with growth, would require constant vigilance and difficult choices. But in that moment, watching my uncle retreat from a battlefield he had assumed would be an easy conquest, I understood more clearly than ever why grandfather had made the choice he did. Not because I was perfect or even necessarily right, but because I was willing to question, to listen, to consider outcomes beyond the bottom line. In the end, perhaps that willingness to see beyond traditional metrics of success was the most valuable inheritance of all. 3 years after the fateful shareholders' meeting, Hamilton Industries had evolved in ways neither Victor nor I could have fully predicted. The pharmaceutical division, guided by ethical oversight and transparent research practices, had developed 2 breakthrough treatments that not only generated substantial profit, but genuinely improved patient outcomes. The educational initiative had expanded to support teacher development programs in 3 states, creating a pipeline of inspired educators and engaged students. Most surprisingly, Hamilton's approach had begun influencing other companies in our sector. What critics had initially dismissed as idealistic or unnecessarily restrictive had proven not just ethically sound, but economically viable in the long term. Sustainable practices, community investment, and ethical governance weren't just morally satisfying, they were increasingly recognized as smart business strategy. In a world where consumers and investors alike demanded more from corporations than mere profit, Victor and Derek had indeed launched their own venture in Singapore, focusing on technology investments. Reports suggested moderate success, though nothing approaching the empire Victor had once commanded at Hamilton. We maintained minimal contact, exchanging perfunctory holiday greetings and occasionally crossing paths at industry events. The wounds had scarred over, if not fully healed. Within the family, new patterns had emerged. Sophia had found her calling in healthcare ethics, becoming a respected voice in establishing standards for pharmaceutical research. Olivia's marketing expertise had transformed Hamilton's brand identity, emphasizing transparency and social impact. Victoria had expanded the foundation's work to address educational inequality nationwide. I continued teaching, though on a reduced schedule that allowed me to fulfill my responsibilities to both my students and the company. The dual roles kept me grounded in what mattered: the individual growth and development that represented success in its most meaningful form. On the 3rd anniversary of grandfather's passing, I visited his grave alone, placing a simple arrangement of his favorite blue hydrangeas against the granite headstone. "You were right," I said quietly to the silent marker. "Legacy isn't what you accumulate, it's what you contribute. It's not measured in dollars, but in lives touched and improved." A gentle breeze stirred the flowers, carrying the sweet scent of early summer blooms across the peaceful cemetery. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of connection to the man who had entrusted me with his vision. Not because I was perfect, or even the most obvious choice, but because I understood what he had come to value most: that true wealth lies not in what you own, but in what you make possible for others. Uncle Victor's boast that it's all mine had revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what it truly was. The Hamilton legacy wasn't about possession or control. It was about possibility, purpose, and the courage to value something beyond accumulation. A lesson captured perfectly in the final frames of grandfather's video, where wealth was measured not in balance sheets, but in lives transformed. 5 years later, I stood before a new building on the Hamilton Industries campus, the Edward Hamilton Center for Ethical Innovation. Inside, researchers, educators, and business leaders collaborated on developing solutions to pressing social challenges while maintaining economic viability. As I cut the ribbon at the dedication ceremony, I caught sight of a familiar figure at the back of the crowd. Uncle Victor watched thoughtfully before nodding once in my direction. Not surrender, not approval exactly, but perhaps finally, understanding. Some lessons take a lifetime to learn. Some truths require a final video to reveal. "Thank you for experiencing my uncle boasted it's all mine." Then the lawyer pressed play on the final video. If this story about values, legacy, and the true meaning of wealth resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment when someone's true character was revealed in an unexpected way? Or perhaps you've had to reconsider what success really means in your own life. Share your story, because our collective wisdom grows when we exchange these powerful personal insights.